In this lesson, we're going to be showing you an example of how you can copy content over from one sheet to another, also get a particular set of data from a sheet and copy it over to the other one, creating brand new sheets as well from the data that gets copied. And there's a number of functions that we're going to look at. So this one here will create a new sheet from sheet number 1. So taking the dummy data from sheet number 1, and it will simply create a brand new sheet. So there's our new sheet that we've created, and this is a duplication of the contents of sheet number 1. And we also set a name for the sheet, test 1, 2, 3. There's also where we can copy over only the format over to sheet number 5. So we're going to get the format from sheet number 1, which in this case we've got some red. Let's add in some blue. So just some styling values here, and let's copy the format over to sheet number 5. So this is from sheet number 1 to sheet number 5. So let's we see that, and let's try that, running that one more time, and just make sure that we're copying the format over. So you can see now we've got the blue on the same cells that we have on that original. If we want to copy the content over, there's also an option for that we're going to be covering in this lesson. So what this does is this copies the content over from sheet 1 to sheet 4, but removes out the styling and the formatting there that we had. We can also copy from one sheet to the other. So if we want to copy the entire contents from sheet number 1 to sheet number 3, so we can do that as well. And this is an example of how we're going to be selecting the range. So copying sheet number 1 to sheet number 3. So I copied the contents and the formatting in this case, as we're getting the simple data range. You can also select particular ranges. So in this example, we're going to be selecting the first 3 rows from sheet number 1, creating a brand new sheet called test 1000 and adding that content into it. So let's see how that looks. So going over to sheet 1000, first 3 rows, first 4 columns of content coming from data in sheet number 1. And then there's also, we can copy contents from the sheet into the same sheet. And so if we remove out the B and E, or D and E, and what this will do is this will copy the contents from the sheet number 1 into columns number D and E. So copy the first 2 columns, and we're doing this by selecting the various danger ranges, which can be adjusted to suit your needs. So that's what we're covering in this lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be setting up a sheet and then copying some data from one part of the sheet to the other. So let's go ahead and open up, log into the Google account, go to Drive, create a brand new spreadsheet. So this is our testing sheet where we're going to test the copyTo method. And then let's populate some data into the sheet with some random data. And then now let's open up the bound script, app script editor. So under tools, go to script editor. And here we can give a name to the app script. So I'm going to name it the same as the Google spreadsheet. So test copyTo, and we'll rename the sheet to test copyTo. So what we want to do in this exercise is first we're going to use the my function, and we're going to select the active spreadsheet. So we do that by setting up an object that's going to contain the active spreadsheet, and then using the SpreadsheetApp class, we get the active spreadsheet object, and that will return back the spreadsheet object. You can see that when you do the log, and that will return back the spreadsheet object. We're going to have to run and set the permissions for the application. So let's go ahead and do that. And then go through the review permissions, accept the permissions, which allows the script to operate as that account and allows us to create, edit, and delete Google Sheets spreadsheets. So that allows us to interact with the spreadsheet object. And then we logged out. So now next time we run it, we've already accepted permissions, and now we've got the spreadsheet object. So that means that we can select content from the spreadsheet. So let's go over to the spreadsheet, and if we want to simply copy the current sheet and create a brand new sheet, we can select it as the source sheet, and do this by using the spreadsheet object that we've just created. And then we get the sheet. So we can get the sheet by name, and this sheet is sheet 1. And then what we want to do with sheet 1, so the source sheet. So we're taking the source sheet and then using the copyTo method and setting it up and copying it to another part of the spreadsheet object. So this is where we're adding in the spreadsheet object. And then we need to specify so it will automatically create a new spreadsheet. And then we can set a name for that newly created spreadsheet. And I'll just call that test. And we can also, here we can set and then activate it. So this is going to be the spreadsheet that's going to be the active spreadsheet. So when we run the function, it runs the code and automatically creates the spreadsheet, copies all the data, and then has the spreadsheet test as the active spreadsheet. So that just means that whenever we switch over to the spreadsheet, the active one is going to be the one that is going to be highlighted here in the bottom tabs of the spreadsheet. So let's create a few other functions. So this will just get data, make new sheet. So rename that function. And we'll create another function. And let's just create another function. And what this function will do is this is going to copy from one part of the sheet to another. So sheet and within the same sheet. And we're also going to be using the active spreadsheet. And this time, instead of using the get sheet by name, we can automatically select the first sheet by getting the sheets object using the get sheets method. So that's going to return back all of the available sheets. And then we want to simply select the first sheet that's available. And we can use the logger log and source sheet. And here we can get the name of the sheet. So we'll output the name using the get name method. So select the sheet, same sheet function, and we can see that the name is test. And because the sheets are similar to arrays, they start out at 0 base. So if we want to get the first sheet, it's going to have an index value of 0. So let's try running that again, and this time we do get sheet 1. If you want to take a look at what's contained within the sheets object, we can log out the source sheet as well. And this is going to be a sheet object. And then for the sheet object, what you can do is you can loop through all of the available sheets. So I'll just set up a separate value for that. And that's going to get an array of all of the sheets. And then this is something that you can loop through. So if you want to go through each one of the sheets, return back the sheets, get the names of all of the sheets that you have available, you can do it within this type of format where we're going to be just outputting into the log as we loop through the sheets, and we can get the name of each one of the sheets and output that into the log. So let's run that. We're looping through sheets. So when we add more sheets, we're going to see them being listed out by their names within the log. So next up, let's select that we've selected the source sheet, and we want to select a particular range that we want to copy over to another part of that same sheet. So we want to copy it within the same sheet. So let's select the source. So we're getting the range of that source sheet. And you can set that up within the variable where we've got range. And that's going to take from the source sheet and get a range from the source sheet. So where we want to start the range, I'm going to start at A and go to column B. So that's the range that we're accessing on the sheet. This should be uppercase. And let's log out the results of what we've got for the range. So this is the selected range that we want to output and use. So we've got a range object there. So that means within the range object, we can copy that content to another part of the sheet. So this is the source range, or range source. And then this is the range destination. And where do we want to start this range destination? Let's see what we've got. So under A, and if we want to copy it over to D, so let's do that, where we're going to start at D1. Is going to be where the starting point is, where we're copying the range of A and B over to D1. So that's the destination range. And now let's put it all together, where we've got the range source, and then we're using the copyTo method in order to set it to the range destination. And let's try that. And actually, let's log out or comment out that logger there. So now we go back to sheet 1, and what we've done is we've copied the contents from A and B into the sheet 1 starting at D1. So that's where we had made the copy. So that's an example of how you can copy sheet within a sheet. And if you want to copy the full range into a brand new sheet, you can do that as well. So here we saw how we can create and copy the data into a new sheet. So let's show you how you can copy to, and we'll just call it copyTo sheet. So if we already have an existing sheet, sheet number 2, and we want to copy sheet number 1 contents to sheet number 2, and we want to specify it by the sheet names, selecting the sheet object, and we'll just call it sheet 1. So sheet object get sheet by name, and the first sheet is called sheet 1. And we also want to get the data range, so get the data range. So that will select all of the available data range in the block. So copying all of the contents that have data. So that means that even if you have some data out there, this changes the data range to be this instead of this block of code. So it's not going to pick out certain data. These are all going to be null and blank, and it's going to take to the furthest column as well as the furthest row, so wherever you've got data. So once I remove that, then the data range is just going to be simply this. So wherever we've got content. And let's select sheet number 2. And we're going to get the data range for sheet number 2. And then taking sheet number 1 and use copyTo. And where we want to copy it to is sheet number 2. So we got those by name, and this is where we want to just do the copy. So let's try this function. And that gets executed. So let's check sheet number 2. And we've got the contents copied over. So you can also specify specific parts. So if you want to only copy the contents, and let's say we had some colors, some bolding, some styling, and maybe this was, and let's do this as a sum. So now let's see what happens when we've got a new sheet. And we'll run that to sheet number 3. So that we're copying the contents over to a new sheet. Let's see what happens. So it copied over all of the styling and the formula. And let's create a sheet number 4. And you can also be more specific on what you're copying to. So you've got an opportunity to add in some options. So if you want content only, copy, the structure is going to be the same. And where we're doing the copy to, so I can update this as well to be more consistent with what we've got within the code. So we're copying it over to sheet number 4. And then we've got some options that we can specify. So if we only wanted the contents only, we can set that to true. That's a Boolean value. And let's run that, and we'll check what we've got in sheet number 4. And now we can see that it's just only copied over the contents. So it's removed out the styling and the formulas. So those are some of the options that you can do. You can also keep only format only. But mainly what you're going to be using is if you only want the contents, then set it to contents only. And if you do want to keep the format, let's do one more, and we'll just do the format only. Format only copy. We'll create another spreadsheet. I think we're on to number 5 there. And go back over to here. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy only the format only. And we'll see what the difference is here. So save and update that function to copy format only. And so now within, we don't see any the contents copied over, and it actually copied over the format. So let's do that one more time and then run the format only. And as you can see, it updated the format only. So it took where we've got the styling properties of red, and it copied that part only over to what we've got in sheet number 5. And you can also be very specific, as we saw, the different data ranges. So if you want to only, let's say, copy the first 3 columns, so only the first 3 columns. Once again, we select the spreadsheet object, and then let's select the sheet. So this is going to be our source sheet, and using the sheet object, get the sheet by name and select it by its name. So this is just a string value for the name of the sheet. And so that's our source sheet. And also let's get our range. So this is our source range. And using the source sheet, and then get range. So the data range selects all of the data. If we want to use the get range, this allows us to be more specific on the range that we're selecting. So if we want it to start at column 1 and row 1, we can start at row 1, column 1, and then the number of rows that we want to get. So in this case, we want to get 3 rows. And this will pick up the first 3 rows. And then we can also specify the number of columns that we want to get. So I'm just going to leave that blank, and that's going to pick up our source range. And by default, if we don't include the columns, it will just take whatever the first column is. So this will default automatically to 1, and we'll change that afterwards. So next up, we need to create our destination. So let's set up the destination sheet, and we're creating a brand new spreadsheet. And this is going to be a spreadsheet within that current active spreadsheet object. So here we can do a insert sheet method. And then also within the same statement, we can add together and add the set name. And you can also set the name afterwards. So I'll just set the name to test 100. And then here we can select that source range and use copyTo, and then specifying the destination sheet object. And so this is specifying to add it into whatever the destination sheet object is. Let's run that and see what happens. And what happened here is we threw an error because the ranges aren't the same. So we need to specify the range using the get data range which will allow us to add the sheet content into the current data range. So let's try to run that one more time. And it looks like that sheet already exists. So delete that sheet. And we'll run the code one more time. So what happened initially that it created the sheet, but then when it came to copying the data, it threw an error because it didn't see that the destination range. So once that runs, that gets completed. And as you can see, it only added in the first column because the default is 1. So if you want additional columns of data, let's set that to 4. And let's update the name of it to test 101. And now it's going to take the first 3 rows, or it's actually the first rows 3 only, as we're getting the first 3 rows there. And let's run the function and go over to test 101. And as you can see, it picked up the first 3 rows and it got the first 4 columns of data and added it into the new spreadsheet that had just been created. So these are a number of different functions that you can use in order to copy data over from one sheet to another and also within itself. And you will need to specify the data ranges, both of the source and the destination, unless you're creating a completely brand new sheet, which we saw here earlier, where we didn't need to select the range because it was just a duplication of the existing sheet.